The briefing room at Fort Campbell reeked of stale coffee and nerves. Captain James Rourke had no way of knowing that in the next 72 hours he'd grasp the cross of a chaplain in one hand and watch what had once been a man turn to ash in the other. "It'll happen," the man he'd dismissed had said. "The truth comes through a hole in the ground that ought to remain buried." Now, before we get started, press that subscribe button and enable notifications. Trust me, you're going to want to know what happens next. 12 operators packed the briefing room at Fort Campbell, Delta operators mostly, with a few Air Force para-rescuemen thrown in for kicks. The kind of team you built when something had gone very, very wrong. Captain James Rourke was in the back, arms crossed, observing the intelligence officer struggling with the projector. The intel officer was a young man, perhaps 26, and obviously nervous about briefing a group of men who knew more about combat than he would ever know. "Gentlemen," the officer began, his voice cracking slightly, "what I'm about to show you is classified at the highest level. You've all been read into Operation Blackwood, but the details are unusual." Rourke leaned forward. Unusual was military speak for, "We have no idea what the hell is happening." The screen flickered to life, showing satellite imagery of dense forest. Appalachian mountains by the look of it. Virginia, maybe, or West Virginia. The officer zoomed in on a particular valley, isolated and heavily forested. 3 weeks ago, a geological survey team went missing in this area. Standard expedition. They were mapping mineral deposits for a private mining company. 5 people. They had satellite phones, GPS trackers, the works. On day 4 of their expedition, all communication ceased. Simultaneously. One of the Delta operators, a massive man named Sullivan, raised his hand. "Weather? Clear skies, no storms, no solar activity, nothing that would explain a total communications blackout." "Equipment failure?" Rourke asked. 5 different devices, 5 different manufacturers, all failing at the exact same moment? The intel officer shook his head. "Statistically impossible, but it gets stranger." He clicked to the next slide. Thermal satellite imagery taken at night. The valley was dark except for a single bright spot deep in the forest. This thermal anomaly appeared the same night the team went silent. Temperature readings suggest something generating heat at approximately 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Consistent output, 24 hours a day for 3 weeks. "Forest fire?" Sullivan suggested. "No smoke, no spread, no consumption of fuel. Whatever this is, it's not natural combustion." Rourke studied the image. The heat signature was too regular, too contained. It looked almost artificial. "We sent in a National Guard search and rescue team 5 days ago," the officer continued, his voice dropping. 8 men. They reached the valley, reported finding the survey team's abandoned equipment, and then they started screaming. The room went silent. "We have 17 minutes of audio before their radios cut out. I'm going to play you the last 2 minutes. Be advised, it's disturbing." He hit play. Static crackled through the speakers, then voices, panicked, overlapping. "Can't be real. It can't be. Something in the trees. Oh God, it's moving. Buried. It was supposed to stay buried. Get away from it. Don't look at it directly." Then, screaming. Raw, primal terror that made Rourke's skin crawl. He'd heard men scream in combat before, but this was different. This wasn't pain or fear of death. This was something deeper, something that touched a more primitive part of the brain. The audio cut out. The intel officer cleared his throat. "That was 5 days ago. We've had no contact since. Satellite imagery shows no signs of the National Guard team. They simply disappeared." "So, send in more people," Sullivan said. "Overwhelming force. Figure out what's happening." "We can't." The officer clicked to another slide, showing weather patterns. "There's a storm system moving in. Category strong winds, heavy rain. The worst conditions these mountains have seen in 50 years. We have a 12-hour window before that valley becomes completely inaccessible for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. He looked at the assembled operators. Your mission is to insert via helicopter, reach the thermal anomaly, determine what it is, and extract any survivors. You have 6 hours on the ground. After that, weather will prevent extraction, and you'll have to hike out, assuming you can. Rourke raised his hand. What's really happening here? Geological survey teams don't just vanish. National Guard doesn't scream like that over a hot spring or whatever this is. The intel officer hesitated, then clicked to a final slide. A black and white photograph, clearly old, showing a military installation from the 1950s or 60s. This area was used for classified research during the Cold War, Project Nightfall. The records are heavily redacted, but what we know suggests they were experimenting with unconventional methods of psychological warfare. The facility was supposedly decommissioned and buried in 1967. Supposedly? Rourke asked. The official record says all research materials were destroyed and the facility was collapsed and sealed. But there are inconsistencies in the timeline, equipment requisitions that continued for months after the official closure, personnel transfers that don't match up. And one memo from 1968 that refers to continued containment procedures. Containment of what? That's what you're going to find out. The briefing ended 30 minutes later. Rourke walked out into the cool Kentucky evening, his mind racing. Something about this mission felt wrong, not dangerous. He'd been in danger before, thrived in it even. This was different. This felt like opening a door that was meant to stay closed. Captain Rourke? He turned to find a chaplain standing near the building entrance. Young guy, maybe 30, with the earnest expression that chaplains often wore. His name tag read Martinez. Can I help you, Chaplain? I heard about your mission, Martinez said. I wanted to warn you. Rourke almost laughed. Warn me? About what? The weather? About what's in those mountains. Martinez stepped closer, his voice dropping. I grew up in West Virginia, not far from where you're going. My grandmother used to tell stories about that valley. The old-timers called it the hollow where light dies. Said there were things buried there that should never be disturbed. Respectfully, Chaplain, I don't have time for ghost stories. This isn't a ghost story. Martinez's eyes were intense, almost desperate. In 1967, the year that facility supposedly closed, 17 people from the surrounding towns went missing. Vanished without a trace. The local sheriff tried to investigate, but he was shut down by federal agents. The official story was that it was unrelated to the military research, just a statistical anomaly. And what's the unofficial story? That something got out, something they couldn't control, and instead of dealing with it properly, they just sealed it underground and hoped it would decay or starve or whatever these things do. Rourke studied the chaplain's face. The man believed what he was saying. That much was clear. But belief didn't make something true. I appreciate your concern, Chaplain, but I've faced down Taliban fighters, Russian mercenaries, and more IEDs than I can count. I think I can handle whatever's in those mountains. Martinez reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and silver, a cross on a chain. Will you at least take this, just in case? Rourke almost refused, but something in Martinez's expression stopped him. The chaplain wasn't trying to proselytize or convert. He was genuinely afraid. For them. For what they might encounter. Sure, Rourke said, taking the cross. Thanks. He walked away, stuffing the chain into his pocket and immediately forgetting about it. He had real problems to worry about. Equipment checks, mission planning, making sure his team was ready for whatever they'd find in that valley. He didn't believe in ghosts or monsters or things that went bump in the night. He believed in preparation, in training, in the reliability of his weapon, and the competence of his team. 4 hours later, he was in a Black Hawk helicopter racing through the darkness toward the Appalachian Mountains. The thermal anomaly glowed like a beacon on his tactical display, pulling them forward like a moth to flame. He didn't know it yet, But Chaplain Martinez had been right to be afraid, and the cross in Rourke's pocket was going to be the only thing standing between his team and something that had been waiting in those mountains for over 50 years. The helicopter insertion was textbook perfect. They fast-roped down through a gap in the forest canopy, boots hitting moss-covered ground in near-perfect silence. 12 operators, moving like shadows through the pre-dawn darkness. Rourke assembled his team in a defensive perimeter while they oriented themselves. The forest here was old growth, the kind of primordial woodland that made you feel like you'd stepped back in time. Trees 3 feet wide, covered in lichen and moss. Undergrowth so thick you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. But it was the smell that hit Rourke first. Not the expected scent of decomposing leaves and earth. Something else, something chemical, almost medicinal, mixed with a faint odor of decay, like a hospital left abandoned for decades. "You smell that?" Sullivan whispered, his nose wrinkling behind his night vision goggles. "Yeah," Rourke confirmed. "Mark it in your log. Something's off about this place." Thompson, their communications specialist, was already having problems. "Captain, I'm getting weird interference. Radio's working, but there's this underlying buzz, like standing next to high-voltage lines." "Document it. Keep trying to maintain contact with command every 5 minutes." "Sullivan, point position," Rourke commanded quietly. "Thompson, rear security. Everyone else, standard patrol formation. We're 2 kilometers from the thermal anomaly. Stay alert, stay quiet." They moved out, navigating by GPS and night vision. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no insects, not even wind in the trees. Just the sound of their own careful footsteps and controlled breathing. And that smell, growing stronger with every step. Rourke had been on hundreds of missions. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, places that didn't officially exist on any map. He'd learned to trust his instincts, that primal warning system that evolution had built into every human brain. Right now, every instinct was screaming at him to turn around. But orders were orders. After 15 minutes of careful movement, Sullivan raised his fist again. The team froze, weapons up, scanning for threats. "Captain?" Sullivan's voice was tight. "You need to see this." Rourke moved forward to Sullivan's position. At first, he couldn't process what he was seeing. A deer, or what had been a deer, lay across the path. But it wasn't killed by a predator. Its body was wrong, distorted. The limbs were bent at impossible angles, and the flesh had a strange, translucent quality, like the skin of Subject 17 would later reveal. "What the hell did that?" Sullivan breathed. Chen knelt beside the carcass, careful not to touch it. He pulled out a small radiation detector from his pack and waved it over the body. The device clicked rapidly, the sound accelerating into a continuous buzz. "Radiation," Chen said. "High levels. This animal's been exposed to something that fundamentally altered its cellular structure." "How long ago?" Rourke asked. "Based on the decay rate and the radiation signature?" "Maybe 3 days, right around when the National Guard team went silent." "So whatever's down in that facility isn't staying contained," Thompson observed. "It's spreading." "Bag a tissue sample," Rourke ordered. "We'll need it for analysis. And everyone, check your dosimeters. I want to know if we're walking into a hot zone." They checked their radiation badges. All showed normal background levels, so far. "Whatever this is," Chen said, carefully sealing a sample in a lead-lined container. "It's not conventional radiation. The signature's all wrong. It's like nothing I've seen before." They continued moving, but now everyone was on high alert. The forest felt different now, threatening, like they were being watched by something that understood exactly what they were doing. Every 20 meters or so, they found more evidence of wrongness. Plants with leaves that had grown in spiral patterns instead of their natural configuration. A tree that had somehow grown a second trunk emerging from its side at a 90-degree angle. Animal tracks that started normal and then gradually changed. the prints becoming larger, more distorted, until they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had ceased to be anything recognizable. "This whole valley is contaminated," Sullivan muttered. "Whatever they were doing down there, it's infected everything." Rourke thought about Holloway's words, still hours in his future, but somehow already echoing in his mind. "I'm in the earth. I'm in the trees. I'm everywhere." The contamination wasn't just chemical or radiological. It was something else. Something that changed things at a fundamental level. After 30 minutes of movement through the contaminated forest, Sullivan raised a fist. Everyone froze. "Got something," Sullivan whispered into the radio. 30 meters ahead. Looks like equipment." Rourke moved up to join him, scanning the area through his night vision. Sullivan was right. Scattered across a small clearing were backpacks, tents, scientific instruments, all the gear the geological survey team should have had with them. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. The wrongness of it hit Rourke immediately. When people fled in panic, they took their essentials: water, weapons, communication devices. These packs were intact, fully loaded. The tents were properly staked, not torn down in haste. It looked like 5 people had simply stood up in the middle of their camp and walked away, leaving everything behind. "Spread out," Rourke ordered. "Document everything. I want photos, GPS coordinates, the works, but don't touch anything until Chen clears it for radiation." His team moved through the abandoned camp with professional efficiency. Chen swept each item with his detector before anyone approached it. Most items showed normal background radiation, but some, particularly anything electronic, registered higher levels. One operator, a quiet man named Parker, knelt beside a sleeping bag. "Captain, there's something weird here." Rourke moved to his position. Parker was pointing at the sleeping bag's interior. There were stains, dark, rust-colored patterns that could have been blood. But the stains had a strange quality, almost iridescent in the moonlight filtering through the canopy. "That's not blood," Chen said, examining it with a small UV light. "At least not entirely. There's some kind of bioluminescent compound mixed in, like the creatures you find in deep ocean trenches." "In the mountains of West Virginia?" Sullivan asked skeptically. "In the body of whatever these people became," Chen corrected quietly. Thompson had found the camp's communication equipment: 2 satellite phones, a shortwave radio, and a GPS beacon. All were functional, batteries still charged. He powered on one of the satellite phones. The screen flickered to life, showing a signal strength of 0 bars, despite the clear sky above. "Should be working," Thompson said, frustrated. "We're in open sky. These phones can connect to satellites from the bottom of the Grand Canyon. There's no reason." The phone screen suddenly changed. Text began scrolling across it, but not in English, not in any language Rourke recognized. The characters looked almost like mathematical notation, mixed with circuit diagrams, flowing past at incredible speed. "Are you seeing this?" Thompson asked, his voice tight. They all crowded around. The text continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then the phone went dark. When Thompson tried to restart it, it wouldn't respond. The battery indicator had been showing 80% charge. Now it was completely dead, as if something had drained all the power in seconds. "Bag it," Rourke ordered. "Chen, I want a full analysis when we get back, if we get back." One operator, a tech specialist named Chen, knelt beside a laptop that was still powered on. "Captain, you need to see this." Rourke moved to Chen's position. The laptop screen showed what looked like seismic readings, wave patterns indicating underground activity. But something else had been added to the screen. Handwritten notes in the margins of the digital documents, as if someone had tried to write on the screen itself. The words were barely legible. "It spoke to us. Not human anymore. Don't let it in your head." "These readings are impossible," Chen said, tapping the screen carefully, avoiding the scratched warnings. "According to this data, there's a massive hollow space directly beneath us, at least 200 meters across, 50 meters high. But it's not natural. The walls are too regular, too symmetrical. The buried facility, Rourke said. Maybe. But look at this. Chen scrolled through the data. These readings were taken continuously over 4 days, and watch what happens on day 4. He hit play on a time-lapse animation. For 3 days, the readings showed the expected pattern of a static underground structure. Then, on day 4, something changed. The seismic sensors detected movement. Something large, shifting position deep underground. But that wasn't all. The pattern of movement showed something disturbing. It was rhythmic, purposeful, like something pacing back and forth, thinking, planning. Right before they went silent, Rourke observed. Yeah. And Captain, whatever moved down there, it's big, really big. Based on these readings, we're talking about something at least 12 feet tall, maybe more. And the weight distribution is all wrong for any known animal or machine. Another operator, Davis, had been searching the perimeter of the camp. He called out softly, Captain, you need to see this, now. Rourke found Davis standing at the edge of the clearing, his flashlight pointed at the ground. Tracks. Bare human footprints, but wrong. They started normal-sized, clearly made by one of the survey team members. But as they led away from the camp, they changed. The prints grew larger, the toes elongated, the arch of the foot flattened and widened. After about 20 feet, the tracks were no longer recognizably human. They looked more like the prints of something that walked on 2 legs but had never been human to begin with. And there were 5 sets of tracks, 1 for each member of the survey team. They walked away, Davis said quietly. They transformed and walked away. A branch snapped somewhere to their left. Every weapon in the clearing swung toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. Or was there? In the darkness between 2 ancient oaks, Rourke thought he saw movement. Something tall, hunched, watching them. When he aimed his flashlight at it, there was nothing but bark and moss. Let's keep moving, Rourke said, fighting the unease creeping up his spine. We need to reach the thermal anomaly before sunrise. They continued deeper into the forest, moving more cautiously now. The abandoned camp had rattled them, though none would admit it. These were men who'd faced death 100 times, but there was something about this place, the silence, the isolation, the sense of being watched, that got under your skin. The smell grew worse as they moved. That chemical medicinal odor was now mixed with something organic and rotten, like meat left to spoil in summer heat. It came in waves, stronger when the wind shifted toward them from the valley ahead. Rourke checked his watch. They'd been on the ground for 90 minutes, still plenty of time, but the mission window was tightening. The storm front was moving faster than predicted. They came across more evidence of contamination. A stream that should have been running clear mountain water instead flowed with an oily, iridescent sheen on its surface. Chen tested it quickly. The radiation levels were through the roof. Don't drink the water, he announced unnecessarily. Everyone had already marked it as compromised. Near the stream, they found the first body. It was one of the National Guard team, identified by the uniform patches still visible on what remained of his gear. But the body itself was barely recognizable as human. The transformation was further along than the deer they'd found earlier. The skin had that same translucent quality, and the bones had restructured themselves, elongating in some places, fusing in others. The face was frozen in an expression of such pure agony that even these hardened operators had to look away. He was fighting it, Chen observed, examining the body from a safe distance. Look at his hands. He was clawing at his own face, trying to stop whatever was happening to him. The transformation isn't instant. It's gradual, painful. How long? Rourke asked. Based on the tissue degradation and the transformation progress, maybe 6 to 8 hours from exposure to this. And the survey team was exposed 4 days ago, Sullivan said. Which means they're completely transformed by now, Rourke finished. Whatever they are, they're not human anymore. They found 2 more bodies as they pressed on. Each was in a different stage of transformation, as if they'd been trying to flee the valley, but the changes had overtaken them at different rates. The 3rd body they found was barely recognizable as having ever been human. It could have been mistaken for some unknown animal if not for the dog tags still around what passed for a neck. Thompson knelt beside this last body, carefully retrieving the tags. Sergeant First Class David Morrison, National Guard, wife and 2 kids in Charleston. He tucked the tags into his vest with unusual gentleness. Someone needs to know what happened to him. They won't believe it, Davis said quietly. No, Rourke agreed. They won't, which is why we're documenting everything. After another hour of careful movement, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley, and there, in the center of the valley, was the source of the thermal anomaly. What the hell is that? Thompson breathed. It looked like a sinkhole, maybe 30 feet across, but instead of showing earth or rock at the bottom, it glowed with a dull red light. Not fire, something else. Something that pulsed with an irregular rhythm, like a heartbeat. The glow was hypnotic, drawing the eye, making it hard to look away. That's it, Chen confirmed, checking his instruments. Heat signature matches the satellite data. 400 degrees, steady output. But there was something else. Around the sinkhole, arranged in a rough circle, were figures. At first glance, they looked like statues or standing stones. But as Rourke focused his night vision on them, he realized with cold horror what they were. The transformed victims, the survey team, and the remaining National Guard members, or what they'd become. They stood perfectly still, facing the sinkhole, as if in worship or communion with whatever was down there. The transformation was complete. They were no longer anything that could be called human. Tall, hunched, with that same translucent skin pulsing with red light from within. But they weren't mindless. As Rourke watched, one of them tilted its head, as if listening to something only it could hear. They're still conscious, Chen whispered, horrified. They're still aware of what they've become. As if responding to his words, the creature's head swiveled toward their position. The eyes, those terrible, glowing eyes, locked onto Rourke's position through the darkness and distance. Contact, Rourke said quietly into his radio. Hostiles at 12 o'clock. Distance 40 meters. 7 individuals, heavily contaminated. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. The creatures didn't attack. They simply watched, waiting. Sullivan, Chen, you're with me, Rourke decided. Everyone else, establish a perimeter. If anything moves toward you, you are cleared to engage. But I want one thing absolutely clear. These things used to be human. They might still be human somewhere inside. So we use non-lethal measures first if possible. Captain, Sullivan protested, we don't have non-lethal measures that'll work on something that big. Then we get creative. Set up claymores in a defensive line, positioning for suppression, not elimination. I want to slow them down, not annihilate them. Understood? Reluctant acknowledgments came back over the radio. Rourke, Sullivan, and Chen began the descent into the valley, weapons raised, moving from cover to cover. As they got closer, the temperature rose noticeably. The pulsing red light was brighter, almost mesmerizing in its rhythm. By the time they reached the edge of the sinkhole, it was at least 20 degrees warmer than the surrounding forest, and Rourke could feel sweat trickling down his spine despite the cool mountain air. The transformed creatures still hadn't moved. They stood in their circle, watching, waiting. Up close, Rourke could see more details he wished he couldn't. Their faces still held traces of who they'd been. A woman's face still showed her cheekbones, a man's jaw was still recognizable. But overlaid on those human features was something alien, something that made his mind recoil from trying to process what his eyes were seeing. One of them spoke. The voice was distorted, like multiple voices speaking in unison, harmonics that shouldn't be possible from a single throat. "You came back." Sullivan's weapon snapped up, but Rourke put a hand on his barrel. "Wait. We tried to warn you." The creature's words came slowly, as if speech was difficult, as if it was remembering how language worked. "Don't go down there. It changes. You changes everything." "What's down there?" Rourke asked, keeping his voice calm despite the fear clawing at his chest. "Father, teacher, God." The creature swayed slightly. "He waits for you. He wants to show you the truth, the beautiful, terrible truth." "Father?" Chen whispered. "It's talking about Subject 17 like he's their creator," Rourke finished. "Like he made them this way." "Please." Another creature spoke, this one smaller, probably one of the survey team members. "Kill us. We're still in here, still aware, but not in control. He moves us, speaks through us. Kill us, please." Rourke felt something break inside him. These things were still human, still conscious, trapped in bodies they couldn't control, forced to serve whatever was waiting below. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but we need you alive. We need to understand what happened to you, to stop it from happening to anyone else." "You can't stop him," the first creature said. "He's been waiting so long, learning, growing. He's ready now, ready to spread, ready to transform everyone." Rourke pulled out a flashlight and shined it into the sinkhole. The beam revealed stairs, concrete stairs, descending into darkness. The red glow was coming from somewhere far below, pulsing like a heartbeat, calling to them. "That's the facility," Chen said. "Has to be." "Yeah." Rourke keyed his radio. "Command, this is Rourke. We've located what appears to be an entrance to the underground facility, requesting permission to investigate." Static crackled for a moment before the response came. "Rourke, you are clear to proceed. Exercise extreme caution. Report every 15 minutes. Rourke looked at Sullivan and Chen. Both men were pale, their weapons gripped tightly. They'd all seen the same thing. The transformed victims, still conscious, still human enough to beg for death. "Last chance to back out," Rourke said. Neither man moved. "All right, let's see what Uncle Sam was hiding down here." They descended the stairs single file, weapons raised, each step taking them deeper into the earth. The temperature continued to rise, the red glow intensified, and behind them, the transformed creatures stood in their circle, watching them descend into the hell that had created them. One of them whispered, so quietly Rourke almost missed it. "He's been waiting for you, specifically, Captain Rourke. He knows your name." The stairs went down for what felt like forever. Rourke counted steps, 40, 50, 70. They had to be at least 60 feet underground now, maybe more. The concrete walls were covered in a thin film of moisture that reflected their flashlight beams in strange patterns. "Captain," Chen whispered, "look at this." He was pointing at the wall where someone had scratched words into the concrete. The letters were crude, desperate, carved with something sharp. It knows we're here. Below that, in a different hand, God forgive us, and below that, barely legible, don't let it out. Cheerful, Sullivan muttered. They continued down. The stairs finally ended at a heavy steel door, partially ajar. Beyond it, a corridor stretched into darkness, punctuated by emergency lighting that still functioned after 50 years. The red glow was stronger here, pulsing from somewhere deeper in the facility. Rourke pushed the door open wider with his boot, weapon raised. The corridor was empty. Doors lined both sides, most of them closed. At the far end, maybe 100 yards away, the corridor opened into what looked like a larger chamber. They moved forward, checking each room as they passed. Offices, laboratories, living quarters, all abandoned, all showing signs of a hasty evacuation. Papers scattered across desks, equipment left running until the power died, personal effects still in the bunks. It's like everyone just left, Chen observed. Or ran, Sullivan added. In one laboratory, Rourke found a file cabinet still standing open. He pulled out a folder, flipped through the pages. Technical diagrams, medical reports, psychological evaluations. Most of it was incomprehensible without context, but one phrase kept appearing. Subject 17. The medical reports for Subject 17 were disturbing. Cellular degeneration, accelerated healing, resistance to sedation, violent episodes requiring multiple personnel to restrain. The final entry, dated March 15, 1967, simply read, Subject 17 has breached primary containment. Evacuation protocols initiated. Facility sealed at 21:45 hours. May God have mercy on us. Found something, Sullivan called from across the hall. Rourke joined him in what looked like a control room. Banks of ancient computers lined the walls, most dark and dead. But one monitor still glowed with a faint green light, displaying a simple schematic of the facility. Chen moved to the terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. This is a containment monitoring system. It's been running continuously since 1967, powered by some kind of backup generator. What was it containing? Rourke asked. Chen pulled up another screen. A single word flashed in the center, breach. Below it, a timestamp. March 15th, 1967, 21:43 hours. Whatever they were containing, Chen said slowly, it got out 57 years ago. The implications hung in the air. If Subject 17 had breached containment in 1967 and the facility had been sealed with it inside, then it had been down here for over half a century, alone, in the dark. Captain, Sullivan said quietly, if this thing has been down here for 57 years, what's it been doing? Before Rourke could answer, a sound echoed through the corridor. A scraping noise, like metal dragging across concrete, coming from the large chamber at the end of the hall. All three men raised their weapons, flashlight beams converging on the darkness ahead. Command, this is Rourke, he whispered into his radio. We've entered the facility and found evidence of a containment breach from 1967. Investigating source of thermal anomaly now. Only static came back. Command, do you copy? More static. Their radios were dead, just like the survey teams, just like the National Guards. Looks like we're on our own, Sullivan said. They advanced toward the chamber, moving in tactical formation. The red glow was stronger now, brighter, pulsing with that irregular heartbeat rhythm. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. The corridor opened into a massive chamber, at least 50 feet high, maybe 100 feet across. And in the center, surrounded by broken chains and shattered equipment, was the source of the red glow. At first, Rourke's brain couldn't process what he was seeing. His mind tried to fit it into familiar categories, machinery, a reactor, some kind of experimental device. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized with growing horror that it wasn't machinery at all. It was organic. The thing was roughly humanoid in shape, but grotesquely distorted. Easily 12 feet tall, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Its skin, if you could call it that, pulsed with that red glow, like veins of molten metal running beneath translucent flesh. The face, if it had one, was turned away from them. But the worst part was the evidence of the 57 years it had spent down here. The chamber walls were covered in scratches, carvings, desperate attempts at communication, mathematical equations, chemical formulas, philosophical treatises, all carved into the concrete with what must have been its own fingers, which had worn down to sharp points of exposed bone. It had been thinking, learning. For 57 years, alone in the dark, it had been teaching itself. Jesus Christ, Chen breathed. At the sound of his voice, the thing moved. Not quickly, almost lazily. Its head rotated, joints cracking like breaking wood, until it faced them. The face was human, or had been once. Rourke could see traces of the person Subject 17 had been before whatever they'd done to him. But the eyes glowed with that same red light, and behind them was an intelligence that was absolutely, terrifyingly alien. When it spoke, its voice was cultured, refined, completely at odds with its monstrous appearance. Visitors, how extraordinary. I haven't had conversation in 57 years, 3 months and 14 days. It tilted its head, studying them. You're military. Special operations by your equipment. They sent you to investigate the anomaly, didn't they? To find out what happened to the previous visitors. None of them moved. None of them could. The thing's voice was hypnotic, compelling. The survey team was disappointing. It continued conversationally, screamed until their hearts gave out. Hardly any useful information extracted. The National Guard lasted longer, but their training made them resistant to productive dialogue. It smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. I'm hoping you'll be more enlightening. Rourke found his voice. What are you? The fundamental question. What am I? The thing laughed, a sound like grinding gears. I was Marcus Holloway once. Colonel, United States Army. Volunteer for Project Nightfall. They promised us we'd become the perfect soldiers, immune to fear, to pain, to fatigue. Warriors who could operate behind enemy lines indefinitely. It gestured at itself with those bone-tipped fingers. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and their worst nightmares. What did they do to you? Chen asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear for a moment. Do? To me? Holloway's smile widened. They gave me a gift, Dr. Chen. Yes, I know your name. I've been listening to your radio chatter since you entered the valley. They gave me the gift of evolution unbound by time. They exposed me to a unique form of radiation, not nuclear, not electromagnetic, something else entirely. Something they discovered in a meteor that fell in New Mexico in 1947. Roswell, Sullivan breathed. Not quite Roswell, but close. The object contained a form of energy that doesn't exist naturally on Earth. When living tissue is exposed to it, the cells don't die. They evolve, rapidly, purposefully, adapting to any condition, overcoming any limitation. I was the 17th subject. The first 16 either died immediately or went insane as their brains evolved faster than their minds could adapt. Holloway began to pace, his movements eerily graceful despite his grotesque form. But I adapted perfectly. My mind expanded as my body changed. I could think faster, process more information, see connections that no human brain could comprehend. For the first few weeks, it was magnificent. I felt like a god awakening. Then what happened? Rourke asked, trying to keep Holloway talking, buying time to think. Then they got scared, Holloway said, his voice taking on a bitter edge. They saw what I was becoming and realized they couldn't control it. So they sealed me in here, left me to die in the dark. But I didn't die, Captain Rourke. I evolved. For 57 years, I've been evolving. He spread his arms, gesturing to the equations on the walls. I've solved problems that humanity won't encounter for centuries. I've mapped the fundamental structure of reality itself. I've learned to extend my consciousness beyond my body, to touch the world through the energy I radiate. That's how I created my children. The transformed people above, Chen said. My apostles, Holloway corrected. The first wave. They're not perfect yet. The transformation is still crude, painful. But with each generation, I refine the process. The next wave will be better, faster, less traumatic. Eventually, the change will be so subtle that people won't even realize it's happening until they're already transformed. And then what? Rourke demanded. What's your endgame? Endgame? Holloway seemed amused. This isn't a game, Captain. This is evolution. This is the next step in human development. Right now, humanity is trapped in flesh that decays, limited by brains that can barely process the complexity of the universe. I'm offering liberation from those limitations. He moved closer, and the operator's weapons tracked him, but no one fired. There was something about his voice, his presence, that made it hard to pull the trigger. Imagine, Holloway continued, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality, a world without disease, without aging, without death, where every human has access to knowledge beyond imagining, where consciousness can extend across continents, where the limitations of meat and bone are transcended. That's what I'm offering. At the cost of humanity, Rourke said. Humanity is an evolutionary dead end, Holloway replied. You cling to your mortality like it's something precious. You celebrate your weakness, your limitations. You call it being human, as if that's somehow noble. But I've seen beyond that illusion. I've touched something greater. You've become a monster, Chen said quietly. Monster, Holloway mused. Another word humans use for anything they don't understand. Your ancestors called fire a monster. They called electricity a monster. They called every advancement monstrous until they couldn't imagine living without it. I'm not a monster, Dr. Chen. I'm a prophet. I'm the future. The future where everyone is enslaved to your will, Sullivan growled. I saw those people outside. They're still conscious, still aware. But they can't control their own bodies anymore. You've made them into puppets. Temporary limitation, Holloway said dismissively. The early stages of the transformation leave the individual consciousness somewhat fragmented, but with time, they merge into something greater. They become part of the collective, part of me, part of something that transcends individual existence. You mean they stop being individuals at all, Rourke said. They lose everything that makes them who they are. They gain everything, Holloway countered. They gain immortality. They gain knowledge. They gain purpose. What does individuality matter compared to that? It matters because it's all we have, Rourke said. It's what makes us human. Our choices, our connections, our ability to love and hate and hope and fear. That's humanity. Strip that away, and you don't have evolution. You have extinction. Holloway was silent for a moment, studying Rourke with those glowing eyes. You're more intelligent than the others, he finally said. You understand the implications. You see what I'm offering and you're still refusing it. Fascinating. Tell me, Captain, why? Why cling to weakness when strength is offered? Why embrace death when immortality is within reach? Because strength without humanity isn't strength, Rourke said. It's tyranny. And immortality without choice isn't life. It's slavery. Beautiful words, Holloway said. But words won't stop what's coming. I've already spread beyond this facility. My influence extends through the groundwater, through the roots of the trees, through the very air you're breathing. Every breath you take brings you closer to transformation. Sullivan and Chen both instinctively held their breath, then realized how futile that was. "Oh, don't worry," Holloway said, amused. "The transformation takes time, hours at minimum. You have time to make your choice. Join me willingly, and the transformation will be gentle. Resist and, well, you've seen what happens to those who resist." "There's a third option," Rourke said. "The others?" Sullivan asked. "The survey team, the National Guard?" "Gone, transformed. They're up there now, in the forest, trying to remember what it's like to be human." Holloway's smile widened. "Would you like to see them?" "No," Rourke said firmly. "We're leaving, and we're sealing this facility permanently." "I'm afraid I can't allow that." Holloway took a step forward, and despite his size, the movement was eerily graceful. "You see, I've spent 57 years down here, learning, evolving, perfecting what they accidentally created, and I've realized something important." He spread his arms wide. "Humanity is evolving, slowly, painfully, through the crude mechanisms of natural selection. But it doesn't have to be that way. I can accelerate the process. I can transform everyone, elevate them beyond their biological limitations. No more disease, no more aging, no more death. No more humanity," Chen said. "Humanity is weakness," Holloway replied. "Flesh is weakness. Fear is weakness. I can remove all of it, make everyone like me. Perfect, eternal." Rourke's hand moved to his pocket, fingers finding the cross Martinez had given him. He didn't believe in divine intervention, but right now, he'd take any help he could get. "The facility stays sealed," he said. "You stay down here. That's how this ends." Holloway laughed again. "Oh, Captain Rourke. Yes, I heard your name when you radioed. You misunderstand. This facility was never meant to contain me. It was meant to give me time. Time to evolve. Time to perfect the process. Time to prepare." The red glow intensified, and Rourke realized it wasn't coming from Holloway alone. It was coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The entire facility was suffused with whatever he'd become. "I've been growing for 57 years, Holloway said softly, "spreading my consciousness through every molecule of this place. The facility isn't my prison. It's my body. And through it, I've reached the surface. I've touched the trees, the earth, the water. I've tasted the world above." He smiled. "And soon, I'll touch everyone, starting with your team above ground." Rourke grabbed the cross from his pocket, not thinking, just acting on instinct. As his fingers closed around it, something shifted. The red glow flickered. Holloway's smile faltered. "What is that?" the thing hissed. Rourke held the cross up, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he felt his fear recede. Not disappear. He wasn't stupid enough to think this was over, but it became manageable, controllable. "It's faith," Rourke said. "Something you forgot about during your 57 years of evolution." Holloway recoiled as if burned. "Silver. Simple silver alloy. It shouldn't affect me. It can affect me. I'm beyond such primitive superstitions." But he was backing away, and the red glow was definitely dimming. Chen and Sullivan were staring at Rourke like he'd grown a second head. Then, Chen's eyes widened. "Captain, the reports mentioned Subject 17 showed extreme sensitivity to certain metals, specifically silver. They thought it was just an allergic reaction to the chemical treatment they'd used." "It's not the metal," Rourke realized. "It's what it represents. Martinez said this valley was called the hollow where light dies. Places have power. Faith has power. And whatever they did to you, Holloway, it made you vulnerable to that power. Impossible, Holloway snarled. But he was pressed against the far wall now, as far from the cross as he could get. Rourke advanced, holding the cross forward like a weapon. Sullivan, Chen, get to the control room. Find the self-destruct system. Every Cold War facility had one. Captain, if we trigger it, we'll only have minutes to get out, Chen protested. Then we better move fast. Sullivan and Chen sprinted back toward the control room while Rourke kept Holloway pinned with the cross. The thing that had been human was trembling now, its red glow fading to a dull ember. "You're making a mistake," Holloway said, his cultured voice cracking. "I'm offering evolution, transcendence, immortality." "You're offering slavery," Rourke replied. "Existence without humanity. That's not evolution. That's extinction." He could hear Chen's voice echoing from the control room. "Found it. Initiating self-destruct sequence. We have 15 minutes. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lighting switched to red. A mechanical voice announced, "Self-destruct sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately." Holloway let out a roar that shook the chamber. "You can't destroy me. I'm in the earth. I'm in the trees. I'm everywhere." "Then we'll burn the forest," Rourke said. "We'll scorch the earth. We'll do whatever it takes to make sure you never spread." He backed toward the corridor, still holding the cross forward. Holloway didn't follow, but his voice chased Rourke through the halls. "You can't kill an idea, Captain. You can't destroy evolution. Others will come. They'll find my research. They'll continue what I started." Rourke met Sullivan and Chen at the stairs. They ran, taking the steps 3 at a time. Behind them, explosions began deep in the facility. The self-destruct wasn't just demolition charges, it was thermite, incendiaries, devices designed to burn so hot they'd melt the bedrock itself. They burst out of the sinkhole just as the first massive explosion shook the valley. The ground heaved beneath their feet, trees swayed and cracked. "Move, move, move, T!" Rourke shouted into his radio, hoping it would work now that they were above ground. "All teams, converge on the extraction point. We have incoming danger." They ran through the forest as the earth itself seemed to scream. Behind them, the sinkhole collapsed in on itself, and a column of flame shot into the pre-dawn sky. Rourke's team emerged from the tree line just as the Blackhawks swooped in for emergency extraction. He counted heads. Everyone was there, including the operators who'd been on perimeter security. As they lifted off, Rourke looked down at the valley. Fire was spreading through the forest, consuming everything. The thermal anomaly wasn't just gone. It was being sterilized by temperatures that would kill anything organic, anything that might carry traces of what Holloway had become. "Captain," the pilot's voice came through his headset, "we're getting reports of forest fire. Recommend we notify state authorities." "Negative," Rourke replied. "This fire burns until there's nothing left. That's an order from command level." He looked at Sullivan and Chen. Both men were pale, shaking with adrenaline crash. They'd seen what he'd seen. They knew what they'd left behind. "Does anyone believe that just killed it?" Sullivan asked. Rourke thought about Holloway's final words, about how he'd spread through the earth, about the survey team and National Guard, transformed and wandering the forest. "No," he admitted, "but we slowed it down, bought time." Time for what? Time to figure out how to kill something that's already died once and kept thinking for 57 years. The flight back to Fort Campbell was silent except for the rotor noise. Rourke stared at the cross in his hand, this simple piece of metal that had driven back something that claimed to be beyond human weakness. Chaplain Martinez had known. Somehow, he'd known. When they landed, Martinez was waiting on the tarmac. He took one look at Rourke's face and nodded slowly, understanding without words. "You saw it," Martinez said. "Yeah, we saw it." "And the cross?" "Worked. Don't ask me to explain how or why, but it worked. Martinez smiled sadly. Faith isn't something you explain, Captain. It's something you experience, especially when you're facing something that can't be explained by logic or science. It said others would come, that they'd continue the research. They probably will. Humans have always been drawn to forbidden knowledge. But now you know the cost. Now you know what's at stake. Rourke looked back toward the mountains, where smoke was still rising into the morning sky. This isn't over. No, Martinez agreed. But you survived the first round. That's something. 3 days later, Rourke was called back to the briefing room. The same intel officer, looking even more uncomfortable than before. The debriefing had lasted 6 hours, with representatives from DARPA, the CDC, and several agencies whose names were redacted from the official record. Captain, we've recovered some materials from the facility before it was completely destroyed. Project Nightfall files. They make disturbing reading. He pulled up documents on the screen. Rourke recognized Marcus Holloway's face in a photograph, younger, human, smiling in his army dress uniform. He looked normal, happy, someone you'd want on your team. There were 17 test subjects in Project Nightfall. Holloway was subject 17, the most successful transformation. The others died or went insane. Define successful, Rourke said dryly, though the word left a bitter taste in his mouth. They achieved their goal, a soldier immune to fear, pain, fatigue, self-healing, enhanced strength and speed. The problem was the psychological effects. The transformation didn't just change their bodies, it changed their minds, made them different. Evil. That's a subjective term. Let's say incompatible with human values. The officer clicked through several more documents. According to the files, Holloway was the first to maintain full cognitive function throughout the transformation. He could still speak, still reason, still follow orders. For 3 weeks, they thought they'd succeeded. What happened after 3 weeks? Rourke asked, though he suspected he knew. He started asking questions, philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness, the purpose of existence, whether humanity deserved to continue in its current form. His IQ tests showed scores that were literally off the chart. The tests weren't designed to measure intelligence at that level. And then, he started refusing orders. The officer pulled up an audio file. This is from his final psychological evaluation before containment breach. A voice played through the speakers, Holloway's voice, but younger, more human. I've been thinking about what they've made me into, what they think they've made me into. They wanted the perfect soldier, and they succeeded, but they forgot that perfection doesn't follow orders. Perfection recognizes its own superiority and acts accordingly. They're afraid of me now. Good. They should be. The recording ended. 2 days after that evaluation, he breached containment, killed 6 guards and 3 scientists before they managed to seal him in the lower levels. The official decision was made to bury the entire facility rather than risk him escaping to the surface. The officer clicked to another document. But here's what you need to know. Project Nightfall wasn't the only program. There were 6 other facilities conducting similar research, all supposedly decommissioned in the late 1960s, all sealed and buried. Rourke felt his stomach drop. Supposedly? We're checking on them now. Satellite surveys, seismic readings, thermal anomalies. The officer's voice was grim. So far, we've found thermal signatures at 2 other locations, Virginia and Montana. More breaches? Possibly. Or maybe just residual effects. We won't know until someone goes in to investigate. And let me guess, you want my team for that job? The officer nodded. You're the only ones who've encountered one of these things and survived. You know what to look for, how to respond. Rourke thought about Holloway, about the intelligence behind those glowing eyes, about the 57 years of evolution and learning, about the things he'd said about spreading, about transforming humanity. We need to find them all, Rourke said, before they get out. That's the mission. You'll have unlimited resources, authorization at the highest levels. Rourke stood up. I'll investigate, but if we find another one of these things, I'm putting it down. Period. The officers started to protest, then seemed to think better of it. Just document everything. Some people want to study these things, understand them. I'm not saying I agree, but those orders come from very high up. Those people didn't see what I saw, Rourke said flatly. They didn't hear Holloway talking about spreading his gift to everyone. They didn't watch people beg for death while trapped in bodies they couldn't control. Study it if you want. Study the ashes, but nothing leaves those facilities alive. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Chaplain Martinez. I want him on the next mission. A chaplain? On a combat operation? You're sending us into places where faith is the only thing that works against these creatures. Yeah, I want a chaplain. Specifically, I want Martinez. He knew something was wrong with that valley before any of your satellites detected it. His grandmother's stories, the old warnings, there's wisdom in that. Knowledge that your classified files don't contain. I'll see what I can do. No, Rourke said firmly. You'll make it happen. Martinez comes, or I don't go. And without my team, you're sending whoever you send next to their deaths. We both know it. The officer nodded slowly. I'll make the arrangements. Rourke left the briefing room and found Martinez in the base chapel, kneeling in prayer. The chaplain looked up as Rourke entered, and there was something in his eyes, understanding, sympathy, recognition of shared trauma. I'm going to need your help, Rourke said without preamble. There are more facilities like the one in West Virginia, more things like Holloway, and something tells me we're going to need more than bullets to stop them. Martinez stood slowly. My grandmother always said the mountains remember, that certain places hold darkness that never fully leaves. She was right about the hollow where light dies. She might be right about other places too. Can you teach me? About faith as a weapon? About how to fight things that shouldn't exist? I can try, but Captain, you should know, faith isn't something you learn like tactical skills. It's something you develop through experience, through facing impossible situations and choosing to believe anyway. I held that cross in front of Holloway, and it drove him back. I don't understand why, but I know it worked. The cross is a symbol, a reminder of sacrifice, of love, of light conquering darkness. Holloway had abandoned all of those things, made himself purely logical, purely efficient. The symbol reminded him of what he'd lost, what he could never get back, what he'd sacrificed in his pursuit of perfection. So he used symbols against them. Crosses, holy water, whatever works. Martinez shook his head. It's not that simple. The symbols only work if you believe in what they represent. If you use a cross as just a piece of metal, it's powerless. But if you use it as a representation of faith, of divine protection, of moral authority over evil, then it becomes a weapon. Then teach me to believe. I can't teach you that, but I can be there with you, provide spiritual support, remind you what you're fighting for when things get dark. Rourke extended his hand. Deal. Welcome to the team, Chaplain. 2 weeks later, they were in a helicopter heading toward Montana. Another thermal anomaly. Another buried facility. Another potential Holloway waiting in the darkness. But this time, Rourke wasn't going in unprepared. He wore the cross around his neck, the silver warm against his skin. Martinez sat beside him, calm and centered, reading from a small, leather-bound book of prayers. And in his pack, alongside ammunition and explosives, he carried items that would have seemed ridiculous 2 weeks ago. Holy water, blessed salt, religious texts from multiple faiths. If Holloway had been right about one thing, it was that humanity needed weapons against what they might become, against the temptation to evolve beyond mortality and morality, against the promise of power at the cost of everything that made them human. As they approached the Montana mountains, Rourke looked at his team: Sullivan, Chen, Thompson, Parker, Davis, and 6 others. Good soldiers, good people, worth protecting from monsters wearing human faces. "Remember," he told them over the radio, "these things used to be like us. They made choices that changed them. And we're here to make sure no one else makes those choices. To make sure the darkness stays buried." "And if it's already out?" Sullivan asked. Rourke touched the cross at his neck. "Then we send it back, whatever it takes." The helicopter descended toward the Montana wilderness, toward another hidden entrance to another Cold War nightmare, toward another battle in a war that might never end. But Rourke was ready. He'd laughed at Chaplain Martinez's warning once. He'd dismissed faith as superstition and monsters as fairy tales. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Because now he knew the truth. Some things are real whether you believe in them or not. And faith isn't weakness. Sometimes, when facing darkness that can't be explained, faith is the only weapon that works. He thought about the transformed people standing in their circle around the sinkhole, about their desperate pleas for death, about Holloway's vision of a world where everyone was connected, everyone was immortal, everyone was the same. That wasn't evolution, that was erasure. Humanity wasn't perfect. They were flawed, mortal, limited. But those limitations created meaning. The knowledge that life was finite made every moment precious. The inability to read minds forced them to communicate, to connect, to try to understand each other despite their differences. Holloway had seen those limitations as weaknesses to overcome. Rourke saw them as the foundation of everything that mattered. The helicopter banked toward the mountain valley. In the distance, Rourke could see another thermal signature, another pulsing red light in the darkness, another test of whether humanity could resist its own worst impulses, another chance to prove that some lines should never be crossed, no matter what promises lay on the other side. What would you have done in Captain Rourke's position? Would you have taken the chaplain's warning seriously? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I always read them. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to Military and Veterans Archives. We share true military stories every single day, stories that need to be told. 2 weeks later, they were in a helicopter heading toward Montana. Another thermal anomaly, another buried facility, another potential Holloway waiting in the darkness. But this time, Rourke wasn't going in unprepared. He wore the cross around his neck. Martinez sat beside him, calm and centered. And in his pack, alongside ammunition and explosives, he carried items that would have seemed ridiculous 2 weeks ago. Because now he knew the truth. Some things are real, whether you believe in them or not. And faith isn't weakness. Sometimes, when facing darkness that can't be explained, faith is the only weapon that works. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the heroes among us.